Welcome back to the Regent Law Podcast. On today's episode, we hear from the keynote speaker at our recent law school gala, Erin Hawley. Erin Hawley serves as Senior Counsel and Vice President of the Center for Life and Regulatory Practice at the Alliance Defending Freedom, as well as serving as a law professor at Regent Law School. During this speech, she talks about the important role that Regent Law School plays in the legal landscape. You don't want to miss out.
Thank you so much for having me and for that too kind introduction, Dean Lingo. I am absolutely thrilled to be a small part of this community and the amazing things that are happening at Regent Law. Just today, your students, the Regent Law students, hosted a symposium with scholars from across the country, with litigators from across the country. And I'm here to tell you that that symposium could not have taken place at any other law school in the country. And that's because Regent Law is not afraid to speak the truth. It's not afraid to speak God's vision for people who are invested with the very knowledge, the very image of God the Father, including our unborn children. So I applaud these law students. I applaud Regent Law for that bravery. And I wanted to tell you just a little bit tonight about what I think makes Regent such a very special, special place. And those are three things. Regent is developing in its students not only academic excellence, not only the practical wisdom to practice law with excellence and carefulness, but as well with courage, compassion, and conviction. So first, to speak to courage, as Dean Lingo hinted at, the time for a school like Regent has never been more pressing. Many of you know the challenges that our nations face. Many of you know the values and morals that our children are being taught in schools across the country that certainly don't line up with many of ours. But this is especially true in elite legal practice. I would say the prime example of this is Scott Stewart's case in Dobbs. In that case, there were about 50 amicus briefs. These are friend of the court briefs, of course, filed on behalf of folks interested in a case. And we had actually, I think, 80 on our side. So the pro-life side outpaced the ones that were advocating to keep Roe and Casey. But there was a stark difference between those two piles of briefs. We certainly made up well, let me tell you the difference first. The difference was nearly every major law firm in the country had an amicus brief representing pro-abortion groups arguing that Roe and Casey should remain the law of the land. Some firms that you would even consider to be conservative law firms filed not one, but two amicus briefs. One wasn't good enough, supporting the keeping of Roe and Casey, some of the worst constitutional decisions the Supreme Court has ever made. On the other side, I don't think there was an Am Law 200 firm represented. The reality is that elite legal practice is often afraid to take some of the positions that the Supreme Court needs to hear, that courts around the country need to hear. We need advocates who are willing to write and sign those legal briefs, urging the Supreme Court to overrule cases like Roe and Casey. And it is a crucial gift to the legal profession to be training students who not only excel in constitutional law, who not only excel in legal advocacy, but also have the courage of their convictions to urge their law firms to weigh in. Or if they're going to weigh in, at least weigh in equally on both sides of certain issues. So Regent is committed to raising up a new generation of lawyers who are committed to taking courageous positions. Second, compassion. One of the best things about teaching at Regent is the first 5-10 minutes of class. And Regent classes, as many of you know, are a little bit longer than the standard law school class. They're an hour and 5 minutes rather than the typical 55. And the reason for this is that the first part of that class is a devotional. And that devotional is an opportunity for the professor or students to share something that's been impacting them, something the Lord has been teaching them. And that is actually actually my favorite part of nearly every class. And the reason being is that it gives us a chance as students and people and professors to discuss the things that really matter, the things that are going on in our life, the truths that God has invested in these students. We can talk about how they've been called to the practice of law. This is not something that they've happened upon, but the Lord has planned each and every one of their days, their lives. He's planned for them to be at Regent, and he has a good and perfect plan for the rest of their lives. And there's no law school in the country, or very few, I should say, that can start class with that sort of devotional, with that sort of message to students. My other favorite thing about teaching at Regent is seeing the compassion, the joy that students have not only for one another, but for the world around them. The first day of class, I asked students, as I'm sure many of the other professors do, what gave them an interest in law and what would they like to do? You hear things like prosecutor, defense attorneys, working for nonprofits, working for firms that represent indigent individuals, all sorts of things. But the common theme is Regent Law students are here because they want to serve, because they realize that God has called them to this place and time to do something with their lives. And I'm reminded of the passage that talks about, you shall know them by their love. And that reminds me of the very first years of the gospel, right after Jesus' death and resurrection. And the fact of the matter is that time period was probably even far worse than the time period we were living in. The Roman culture of the day disposed of infants. There were no rights for children, very little for women. And it was a culture that was quite harsh, quite segregated. All the sorts of things you would think of would not make a good start for an upstart religion, sort of like the upstart law school. But the fact of the matter is that Christianity exploded across the then globe. And the reason being, as historians have noted, is because of Christians' radical love for one another and the world around them. This law school is investing students with the skills, attributes, and courage to show that radical love to the world around them and to change it. And I just wanted to mention one personal story. It's not mine, but a colleague of mine at Alliance Defending Freedom. And we take intake calls fairly frequently from people who need legal help or legal advice. And many of them are, mundane contract issues or those sorts of things. But one day we got a call from a desperate woman. She was from, I think, somewhere in the South, but she was in New York. She was a surrogate mom who was going to have this child on behalf of a couple, and the child that she was carrying had a club foot. So the couple had decided to abort that child. She was not pro-life. She said she never thought she would call Alliance Defending Freedom in her life. But she said that I can't do this. I cannot kill the child that is living within me. And my colleague was able to assist her to get a court order to stop the procedure then. And just this is such a tangible reality that lawyers can and do make a difference. Good lawyers matter. Your skills matter as law students, especially when you use them with grace and compassion for the world around you. And then finally, conviction. One of the things I love about Regent is, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you are unafraid to tell the truth. You are unafraid to tell what the Bible says about certain topics. You are unafraid to tell the truth about which Supreme Court precedent might actually be wrong. I remember as a first-year constitutional law student, I hated constitutional law. And the reason being, I was a first year who knew nothing about the law, had not taken a single pre-law class, had no lawyers in my family. And it seemed to me that as you were reading the con law textbook, I was also a science major, so there were right answers, which is really nice. So reading constitutional law, and it's like, I often agreed with the dissent, but it was the dissent, so it couldn't be right, so it was very confusing. But I love that at Regent you have the freedom to tell the truth that you might agree with the dissent rather than the majority, and to explore why that might be the case. So I, for one, am incredibly grateful that a law school like Regent exists. I, again, cannot stress how important this institution is to the future of our legal academy, to the future, really, of our nation, that we will have lawyers who stand up and fight for the truth with skill and compassion and conviction. So thank you to the fantastic faculty who have served here for so many years so well. I was just visiting with Professor Cohn, who was meeting a student from 31 years ago, and just what a legacy of giving to this community. And thank you to Dean Lingo, who is shepherding the ship to even greater places. So I would encourage you all just to think about the difference that a law school like Regent can make in a time period like this. I think it is immensely important.